Facebook. You're broadcasting in 2 places. That's pretty cool.
Big time.
Big time for sure. Okay. There we go. We should be live. All right. We've already got a couple folks in here. That's awesome. Let me get myself set up over here. Wait a couple more minutes. Make sure folks on Facebook are getting in all right. All right. So I suppose we'll go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone that we cannot see. Thank you for tuning in to the speaker series this week. We have Colin Lindberg from Shelterwood Construction, a local passive house builder company. He's also a friend of Yestermore, and we're excited to have him talk about what he's doing. Just a little orientation for folks who haven't tuned in yet. If you're on Zoom, there's a question and answer box that you can type questions into as the talk goes on. There's also a chat box, but it's a little bit hard for me to manage both of those. So please ask questions in the question and answer box. I'm also going to do a slight plug for something that we're really excited about for Yes Tomorrow before we get started. This is our 40th year as an organization teaching design build classes. And to celebrate our 40th year, we have a 40th anniversary t-shirt that you can purchase and pre-order on our website. I'll also post a link to that on the chat for this, and as well as in the Facebook group, so that if you're interested in getting some 40th anniversary Yes Tomorrow swag, you can do so. Again, we just had a few more people tune in, so I'll just repeat. If you're on Zoom, you can ask questions throughout on the question and answer box in Zoom. And if you're on Facebook, you can just ask your questions in the Facebook Live comments, and I'll be checking those and asking the questions where it fits in. All right, Colin, would you like to do a little introduction of yourself and take us away on a ride on how to plan a house build?
Yeah, so I'm just going to go ahead and start the presentation, and I'll get into introductions and all that. And this is very strange because I can't see anyone on here, so I have no idea who I'm talking to besides Rachel, but let's see what happens. So let's see. Where'd it go? There we go. Okay. See if this works here.
Yep, you can see that.
All right. Well, oh wait, this is the wrong slide. I mean, the wrong presentation. Oh, here we go. Okay. So how to plan a house build without going gray. And luckily, hopefully my computer camera is not that accurate and focused, because I'm going completely gray. And I think it's just genetics, not necessarily planning house builds with other people. So a little bit about us. Shelterwood Construction started a number of years ago. We're kind of the new folks on the block. I started it after having a career working for other people and just getting frustrated by cutting corners and not using appropriate products and building buildings claiming to be energy efficient, and just knowing that there was better options out there and better ways to build for long-term durability and environmental ethics and sustainability and all that stuff. So basically, we only take on projects that are either going to be Passive House certified or net zero. And Passive House certification is basically the most stringent energy standard in the world. And I can get into what that exactly means. But to sum it up, they're really healthy houses that use almost no energy inputs for them. They're really good for the occupants because they have fresh, mechanically ventilated mechanical systems that are constantly bringing in fresh air from the outside and running them through filters and exhausting the stale used up air. So it really feels like you're outside on a nice spring day all the time inside these houses. And they have a ton of insulation in them, and they're very well air sealed. So this house in the photo, the entire electrical demand, and that includes heating and cooling for a year, is $300 a year. And that's not including using the solar panels that you can't see on it. So when you include those, this house costs nothing to run. And that's when it's -5 degrees, -20 degrees in the winter, or 90 degrees in the summer. The utility bills are zero for a 3,000 square foot house. And what net zero means is basically the house is going to consume as much energy as it is producing. So there has to be some sort of renewables on the house, or they're brought in from offsite with like a community solar farm or something like that. So we kind of found a good niche, and we have some really great clients who like what we're doing. We only build architect designed houses. We don't do design build. I kind of really believe in having a collaboration with an architect and the clients, and it really gives you a really good project and end result. And you can really do some neat things in that way. So this is just, why do we build to passive house standards or net zero? You know, I'm very concerned as a young father and as a citizen of the world about climate change. That's a big one for me. You know, our environmental ethos are pretty strong at Shelterwood, and, you know, construction and home building is a very, you know, it's not a zero waste thing. You know, I think if you look at landfill statistics, construction debris is, I think, maybe the second one, and energy use globally by buildings is pretty high up there as well. So there's the global perspective, and then there's also, on a smaller scale, if you build like this, these houses are incredibly comfortable. There's very little temperature swing. There's no cold spots. There's no warm spots. You know, the house, if you set that to 68 degrees, it's 68 degrees everywhere. Common question is, are these houses really expensive to build? And they are expensive, but every house is expensive to build. You know, I've heard statistics bandied about that building to passive house standard is 7 to 10% more expensive. But we kind of focus on a longer term than that. And, you know, the saying is do you want to put your money into energy or equity? So do you spend a little bit more upfront, and then you have zero utility bills? You know, we don't know what the price of oil is going to do in a couple of years. We saw it sink in the past couple months, and it could skyrocket. And, you know, there's also emissions and all that stuff. So I like to say, you know, building this way is kind of future-proofing your house. And the building science has come a long way in the past 20 years, where, you know, these houses are kind of mimicking the human body. Your skin is the same as the kind of waterproof layers that we're using to seal these up, and the mechanical ventilation is the lungs of the house. But this isn't a presentation on passive houses or net zero, but I could preach all day long on it. This is kind of, how do you start from saying to yourself, hey, I want to build a house, and how do you get to actually building the house? And I'm trying to break it down. And we've kind of developed a system that really works well, that kind of works in a collaborative method with the clients, the homeowners, and the builder. And it's kind of catching on with other folks as well. So I'll kind of go through the different ways of doing it. The traditional way is called design, bid, build. And that's where the homeowners will hire an architect. They will work with the architect to design their house, and then it gets put out to the contractors for bidding. And normally, you know, an architect will say, hey, you should talk to, XYZ companies, and, be 3 or 4 different companies that they've worked with in the past. And then they send out completed plans, and they, in a month or 2 later, they get some estimates back from the contractors. And, there's some benefits to that and there's some drawbacks to that. And when I first started, I was doing some work on bidding, and I kind of had an experience with a homeowner where they wanted this house, and it was a really, really beautiful house. And they were led to believe that the house was going to be a lot less expensive than it really was. And I kind of cautioned them. I said, hey, the numbers that you're hearing right now are not realistic. They might have been realistic 20 years ago in Houston, Texas, for a subdivision house, but that's not what costs are around here. And I kind of took my hat out of the ring on that project. And then, a month or 2 later, I got a voicemail from the client saying, Colin, can you please, please, please give us a bid on this house? The lowest price we got was 124% above what we were told it was going to cost when we started this, and we don't know what to do. And they had spent a lot of money and a lot of time designing this dream house that then they found out that they couldn't afford. And so that kind of led me to start thinking about different ways of doing it. And what we do is, working with the architects and the homeowners, we kind of work together to identify the goals for the project, both budget, size of the house, layout, and stuff like that. And we all work together to develop it and price it along the way. So there's a system of checks and balances along the way to make sure you're not getting too far ahead of yourself. And throughout this, one of the other different parts is that I get paid for my time estimating. Whereas a traditional design bid build, that cost is hidden in the construction contracts, where with this integrated project delivery, we get paid to estimate the project and to work with everybody along the way. And so that's a cost that's paid up front. And I think there's some real value to that in many different ways. So this is basically going to be about what the steps are to have a project with integrated project delivery. And if you look down here at the bottom of this screen, this is the rough steps in the process. Purchasing land is a huge one, and I'll get into that shortly. So you can either assemble the team or purchase the land in either order. Then you want to hire your team of the architect and the contractor, and then enter into a pre-construction contract with all the parties. And that's just saying, hey, we're committed to working with each other and developing this project. And that comes with a timeline and some accountable things and some meetings to get everything moving in the right direction. Then we go into schematic design and then get some rough square foot pricing and, say, hey, are we on the right track for that? And onward and onward. And I won't read them all off because you all can do that, but I'll just keep moving on this. And I'll try not to get sidetracked because making this presentation was a really good trip down memory lane as well. Vermont is a really, really tough place to build. I grew up in central New Jersey, which was farm country, lots of flat land, no rocks in the soil, no mountains to move, no forest to clear. We don't have that in Vermont. And what I've run into on a couple projects is what I call the allure of cheap land. Someone finds a couple acres and it's the cheapest thing on the market, and it's in the middle of a forest, it's on the edge of a cliff, it's at the edge of a dirt road. It might not even have road access. It could be landlocked from road access. It's so complicated, but you really want to understand what you're getting into if you're looking to build when you buy property, because it can be extremely expensive to buy the cheapest lot. This photo here is when we were doing some initial site clearing, and we ended up building a house, this gorgeous, gorgeous house for this couple. And we had done a little bit of clearing to see where the house could be sited. And this was a really, really hard lot to build on. It had all of the things that I said, you know, on the side of a cliff, in the middle of a forest, at the end of a dirt road. And we had quite a time, and the site work on this project was really expensive because of all those things. We couldn't get trucks up to the site in the winter for some of our tractor trailer deliveries, and we had to pull a couple loads up with a winch, and you know, we had to walk the blasting rig a half a mile up from the main road, just so they could get on site to give us a flat place to work off of. But you know, one of the things I think about often as a builder and also as an environmentalist is, where is it appropriate to build? And I'm not going to get into that, but just some things that I think about is, you know, what's easy to build on and what's appropriate to build on. You know, we in Vermont, we value our local farms, you know, we value our forests. We don't have much land that everyone's psyched to see new houses on, but we have, you know, population who needs housing. So I don't know what the right answer is, but I think that's a conversation for some other time, or someone who's a little bit smarter than I am. It's always interesting to think about, though, because there's always compromises, whether it's forest fragmentation or loss of farmland, or, you know, really expensive lots to develop, or you're building a house that's in the middle of somebody else's gorgeous view that they've looked at their whole life, and all of a sudden there's a house plunked down in a meadow. So yeah, I'm open to suggestions on that. But I always say it's good to check in with an engineer when you kind of narrow down a couple different places, to kind of bounce some ideas about the buildability of the lot you're thinking of, and what sort of permitting you'll need, and is there a septic design, and is there a site plan already there, because those things can get expensive if you buy land without those in. So it's just something you should think about when you're considering it. And I've talked to a number of people, potential clients, about, you know, walking land with them as well, to kind of talk about ideas of house siting and stuff like that. And you know, that's something that we've had some pretty good success, and it's a really fun process for everyone to kind of really dream in the initial stages. So once you get your dream acres somewhere, then you're going to start assembling your team. And this can go either way. You can assemble your team before you buy the land if you know you're going to hone in on something, or you can buy the land and then assemble the team. And this is a really serious decision for everyone involved. You know, building a house is usually the most expensive thing that anyone's ever going to undertake. It's incredibly stressful. I would really love someday to have a staff psychologist or a marriage counselor on my payroll, because it's hard, and you know, it's hard for the homeowners, it's hard for the builder. It's just, it can be very stressful. So we kind of try and do everything as upfront as possible, so that trust is built. But you know, no matter what you do, it's always a ton of money, a ton of time, and a ton of stress. And the rewards can be worth it for when the project is over and we hand over the keys and people can enjoy themselves in their new dream home. But it's hard, and you want to make sure that you assemble a team that works well together. And you know, I have just some little notes here, and it's really just ask lots of questions. Talk to past clients of the architect, talk to past clients of the builders, talk to builders about the architects that you're considering hiring, talk to the architects about the builders. You know, just check references in every which way you can, and make sure you see past projects of both the builders and the architects, and you know, just think of all the questions you can ask and then think some more and some more, because this is a long-term relationship. And, you know, I have a whole list of architects that I've worked with in the past and, you know, have very good relationships with, and most builders will do that. And sometimes the architects will bring me the clients, and sometimes I'll bring the architects to the clients. It can work both ways. And we've got some really great architects in Vermont and in New England. And I definitely encourage projects to use a good architect, because they are very well worth the money that they charge. So you've got your team together, and then what do you do? So we do a pre-construction contract with the clients, and, you know, this is a simple contract that basically outlines a schedule, you know, rough budget, and we sign that, and then we can get to work on developing the project. And typically we tell people to budget, you know, $6,000 to $10,000 for this phase. And that's just what they would be paying the contractor if they're doing, I'll speak for myself. That's what they would be paying my company to develop the project. That doesn't include design fees. That's a separate contract. But in the pre-construction contract, we develop a timeline of how long pre-construction services should last, and then what the costs are going to be and how they're billed and whatnot. And then we start getting into schematic design. And this is really, I step away for the most part, because I'm not interested in design. Nobody would want a house designed by me. We leave that to the professionals, but you know, I'm happy to provide feedback along the way. But these are just really rough sketches between the architects and the clients. It's dreaming on the back of a napkin. I think if there's any architects listening, I'm sure it's fancier than that. And, you know, but this is an example of, you know, this phase of, hey, you know, how does this layout work for the second floor? Do you want to move this around? What do you think about this? And you can look at different roof lines and, you know, different layouts of the rooms and move the house around on the site to see what fits. And this is kind of to get a rough idea of square footage and roughly what you're thinking of. And, you know, this can take a couple months, you know, or it can be compressed down into a couple days. But it's really just to get your brains flowing, and to kind of think about what your goals are with your house build. And then what we do as we finish the schematic design is we do a rough square footage pricing. And these don't stare too closely at this next slide. These are just rough pricing, and it's just a sample. And I hope I took everybody's names and projects information out of here. So let's see. Yeah, so after we do schematic design, we come up with, you know, a rough pricing check-in. And so you can see there's a low cost per square foot and a high cost per square foot column. And what we do is we break it out by floor, or conditioned area versus unconditioned area. And then you can see we have broken out by the garage, a screen porch, a sun porch, a patio. And these are all just square foot ranges for the prices. And then we apply the square footage of what's on schematic design. And so that this is just the house build. And then if you look below, there's soft costs and site work. And so what we do is we like to have all of these things out so that we can look at the project holistically and say, like, okay, well, the actual cost of the house is going to be this, but what are all the other costs going to be? So you can see all in. And a lot of projects will have the land included as well. And you can see at the bottom, you know, what's not included, you know, owner's contingency, solar, landscaping, et cetera. And what we do here is, this is really just our first initial check-in or first initial reality check. And it's like, hey, are we even on the same page here? Are we in the ballpark of where we want to be, or do we need to adjust our expectations? And, you know, I never promise that construction is going to be cheap or easy, but I can promise it's going to be done right with quality. But, you know, even when I look at these prices, it's shocking. It's like, holy cow, how can it cost that much? But benefit is you get to see these prices early on in the process, and you have the ability to, say, hey, this is great, this is what we were thinking, this is what we want, or we can say, hey, I think we need to reduce things, we need to change things, or hey, maybe we don't need that bluestone patio, or maybe we can do one patio and in a couple of years do another one. I've never, basically what happens on every project is, oh yeah, the low budget looks like we can do that, the high budget probably not, that's pretty consistent. But this is a good thing to get the conversations going as far as, how the design is going and where it needs to be steered. So once we get approval for this, the architect gets to go and start doing their design development drawings. And this is where it gets really fun. And, everybody gets to geek out on all the fun stuff in these houses. And the design development is basically, you're really honing in on the final design of the house, the layout, the roof lines, the elevations. And this is sometimes an interior designer gets involved on some of the projects and helps with selections of finishes like tile and flooring and, color selections. And this way, basically, the architects are able to hand us some plans where we can start estimating exactly what the project is gonna come out to be. So we're not just guesstimating. These are real, quotes that we're getting from our subcontractors, and we're doing takeouts and material quantities for the actual project. And the final projects did not come with this really cute dog. So this, typically is going to be about 6 to 8 weeks in design development. And then we take about a month to give our subcontractors time to come out and visit the site if they need to, or, ask questions or make suggestions. Say, hey, I see that you spec this heat pump unit. I think this one would be more, a better fit for this project, and this is why. And a lot of times we'll register the project at this point with Efficiency Vermont, and we work with one of their energy consultants, and they provide feedback on the building envelope and say, hey, you need a little bit more insulation in this spot. I think you could actually, you'll still meet all of our requirements for this climate if you, change this from 4-inch insulation to 3-inch insulation. So we're kind of just really honing in on things here. And then after this is done, we do another round of pricing, but this is much more accurate than our initial square foot range. So then we get into value engineering. And I've always said that I'd love to have a project that we don't have to do value engineering, but we always do. And you can see the note at the bottom, I'm looking for clients who want to skip this step so I can get a new boat. But really, I just want a new bicycle. But it's never happened. So what that is we kind of look at the design and say, hey, what are you willing to compromise on? Or can we change some materials around? Or hey, that deck right there is really expensive. Do you need that, or do you want to change it? Can we reduce this and not compromise the soul and the goals of the project? And this is actually really fun because it's when you can get really creative with what you want. And you kind of really look at your ideas of wants versus needs. And, we've been able to have some projects where we gave a price back on design development. It's like, hey, that's not going to happen. We need to get it to this price, and we all buckle down as a team between the architect, the homeowners, and myself and say, what do we need to do to get to this price, and how do we get there? And it can be really fun and creative to do. And, this is really where the value of this integrated project development comes in, is, you can save a lot more than you're paying the contractor, to work with you to to save some money and to keep the project moving forward. And I've seen a lot of projects salvaged because, you know, this is an option in it before you get to construction documents. So, you know, this is another couple of weeks and it's a lot of back and forth, and yeah, it can be quite fun. So, but yeah, I'm definitely still looking for more bikes if anybody wants to build a new house and skip the value engineering part. So then we get into construction documents, and these are the legally binding documents, full blueprints that can be built off of a selection list and all that stuff. So this is after the team gets to go ahead and say, hey, the project's moving forward, let's go for it, you know, and let's really narrow down everything that we haven't decided on, or let's, you know, take what we value engineered and add those selections or changes into the construction documents. And, you know, it's another bit of chunk of time. It depends on every project. So I'm in the process of doing construction documents with the architect now for a project, and we've been working on it for about a month or so. We have about a week left until we'll get everything ready for our next project that we're going to go to this summer. And, you know, there's a lot of back and forth, but basically, you know, the more work the team can do on these construction documents to get them complete, the more accurate our pricing can be. In the construction world, there can be fixed prices, there can be time and material contracts, and we only do fixed price contracts on our projects, and that way everybody knows what they're getting into. There's no gray areas. There's no, you know, oh, I forgot to estimate this, or oh, I missed this detail, we're going to have to charge you extra. The banks appreciate fixed price contracts because they know what they're getting into for a construction loan. If there's things that aren't selected at this phase, we can do an allowance in the budget. You know, tile is the typical one that has an allowance because there are so many choices and it can be really overwhelming. So we can put a square footage price to that, and then, you know, we just figure out how much it actually costs once the selections are made. And that's where I've really seen a benefit of an interior designer or clients who really want to go to the tile store and pick out those finishes because they say, I want, you know, this tile, you know, in this size and whatnot. And then we can say, okay, it's gonna be this much. And if we have good construction documents, we have our elevations and we can get fixed prices on all that stuff. So we always say that the more choices that can be made up front, the smoother construction can go. And that's smoother for the builder as well as the clients, because after all the selections are made, they can just kind of sit back and, you know, watch the project just get built, and they're not getting construction fatigue from picking out, you know, doorknobs and cabinet pulls 8 months into the project when they're just looking forward to the end of the project. So we try and, you know, firm up everything as much as possible, but there's always flexibility in that, and we can always make changes as we go as well. So these are just some, you know, snippets of information, you know, on the last slide. Let me see if I can go back to it. But over here, what comes with the construction documents are, it's the final set of blueprints from the architect, a project narrative from the architect, and then what we provide is a schedule of values, notes to the estimate, a schedule for the construction phase of the project, and then a contract with the homeowners for construction of it. And so the next couple slides are just examples of that. We get really detailed, and, you know, these can be 30 or 40 page documents that detail everything. You know, this is our notes to an estimate, and, you know, this is a snippet of what some of the mechanical stuff is, you know, fixtures and whatnot, and it goes through, you know, all the wood products, all the carpentry, all the insulation, air sealing, et cetera, and it's all labeled so that there's no questions about it while we're building. Our schedules, we do our schedules basically to the day from the start of construction on over to when we have the windows washed and we hand the keys to the homeowners and say, hey, we're out of your hair, you know, enjoy your new home and let's have a drink on the deck. And so this helps everyone, basically, from myself to my crews to the subcontractors, and this gets released to everybody. And me and my project manager, we update them on a weekly basis. And usually we're within, you know, 7 to 14 days of our initial estimates on the schedule to finish the houses. And we've kind of been honing in on that. And that's really helpful because, you know, the project we're on now, the homeowners just put their house on the market and sold it. And they said, hey, you know, we need to be out of here on this day. Is that going to work? And it's like, well, let's check our schedule. And it's like, yep, we got a week worth of lead time. Like, let's shoot for it and we'll make it. So not only are there task lists on these, we also do a Gantt chart so you can just see a visual of the whole project, start to finish. I didn't put an example on that, but I know a lot of people get really excited about those. Then we do a construction contract, and that's pretty simple. And it basically just says, hey, this is going to refer to the construction documents that were released by so-and-so architects on this date. And then there's attachments of schedule of values and sample notes, the estimate and the project narrative and blah, blah, blah. And, you know, just kind of lays out how the invoicing will work and if there's any sort of arbitration or dispute and stuff like that. And so then we all sign away and we get into the start of phase 2, which is construction. And if anyone wants to come back next week, we can talk about that. But that's basically what we've kind of developed as a way for everyone to understand the process, because there's so many steps and it can be very complicated. So we've kind of tried to make it as simple and stress-free as possible and really just make it so everyone can understand the steps and work together. So yeah, I think that's it. Do I have anything else? Oh yeah, here. So we normally say for our construction projects, and we pretty much only do new construction, 9 to 14 months is what we roughly budget depending on the complexity of the project. So after we start a project, you know, you'll be putting your boots in the mudroom, you know, 9 to 14 months later, and you'll have your move-in day, and you can take over your new home. So yeah, I think, is that it? So you made it through the whole process here. And here's my contact information. Rachel and I were talking that there might be some specific questions about project specific questions. So feel free to give me a call or email me. And I'm happy to answer any sort of questions that you all have.
Yeah, just to remind everybody, if you're on Facebook, you can type your questions into the comments there and I'll see them. And if you're in Zoom, you can ask them in the question and answer box or in the chat. I think I can manage both right now. Colin, I did have someone who was wondering if they'd be able to get the slides. If they email you, would you be able to provide those?
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Awesome. This was great. I think I'd mentioned to you last week how land is always the thing that you want the most, or you don't put as much thought into, as how big your bathtub's going to be, or how big your kitchen's going to be, and where your porch is going to be. So I personally really appreciate the reminders that just because there's a piece of land that's available doesn't mean it's going to be easy or inexpensive to build on. And
that might be one of the most important decisions in the whole process that you ever make too.
Mm-hmm. What's have you had any particularly challenging locations that you've had to build?
Almost every single one.
Because it's Vermont.
Yeah, because it's Vermont. Yeah, we've never gotten that flat lot in South Burlington that that everyone dreams of. Yeah, if we don't have to bring in a blasting company, we're usually feeling pretty lucky as a good start to the project. So
interesting.
Yeah.
Cool. Let's see, we have from Sean. He says, thanks for the presentation. When you do the construction contract, do you do a fixed cost or a time and material contract? And why do you prefer the one that you use?
That's a great question. We've gravitated towards fixed price contracts with well spec'd out projects. Why do I prefer it? I think it's a better deal for everybody. With a time and material project, so a time and material project is basically you have a project that's identified and spec'd out and you estimate it to your best of your ability, but the homeowners assume all of the risk on the project. And what that means is, hey, I estimated that it's going to cost X dollars for, say, 500 lineal feet of wall. Guess what? The weather for 2 weeks got really bad in Vermont, and it was -10 degrees, and it snowed 4 feet during that time. We were still framing those walls, and I'm charging you for time and materials. So all of a sudden, that wall got really expensive. And I think there can be some anxiety with time and material projects because you never really know how much the final bill is going to be. Whereas with fixed price, the builder is assuming the risk, and the banks are going to know what they're going to get. The homeowners are going to get comfortable with a number, at the construction contract. You're going to say, hey, it's going to be this price no matter what. So I always hope for blue skies and 60 degrees and sunny for all of my projects. And unfortunately, I've estimated a couple of those weather conditions in mind. But basically with a fixed price, everyone can kind of understand what they're getting into from the beginning. And time and material, there's a lot of gray area for me that I'm uncomfortable with. There is, a couple other types of contract, and I've heard that some other builders, an option is kind of a time and materials with a maximum cap as well, which is something that I would be open to. I just have never done. So, I think it really depends on what people are comfortable with, really. But so all of our projects are fixed price, and I think it's also easier for us to do that because we keep good historical data of how much things cost us in terms of labor, and we're able to look back on past projects and analyze that. So we have things to compare it to over time, and we track things pretty carefully so that we understand our costs and where we misestimated or whatnot. So hopefully that answered the question. If not, just prompt me again and I'll try again.
I think that was a good answer. You have a couple more questions coming in. One, Galen was wondering how much ledge impacts cost. So dealing with ledge in a particular build site.
The answer is it depends.
Yeah.
Yeah. And honestly, I can escape every question by saying it depends when it comes to cost. I get asked all the time, how much per square foot can you build? And the answer is always, it depends. Mm-hmm. It depends for ledge itself. It depends a lot on the foundation design. It depends on structural issues. It depends on if it needs to be isolated with insulation from your thermal envelope. We always try and blast it out of the way if possible to get a nice clean area. But depending on the foundation design, it can be, you can do trench blasting for certain types of foundation, or you can do a pad above the ledge. It depends, really. So, but it's something that's very, very common in this area. And also I'm not an excavator or a geologist, but certain ledge, there's soft ledge and there's hard ledge. And sometimes excavators can chip away with it with a hammer. And other times it needs to be blasted out. And sometimes it gets you really good finish material for your final landscaping. You can get some really nice rocks or fill out of it as well if you want to do some stone walls. So yeah, but it'll always add costs. It'll never make it cheaper.
Cool. Thanks, Colin. Next question from Daria. If you wanted to build a passive house or high energy performance home, where in
It
the
depends.
timeline? Is that your version of pass?
Yeah. Sorry, go on.
No problem. They were wondering where in the timeline it comes in and if there's anyone that usually would consult for that.
So if I understand the question, if you want to build a passive house, when in the process would you start thinking about that?
Mm-hmm.
At the very beginning.
It depends.
No, that's something you want to start thinking about from the very beginning, and that's where assembling the team is very important. There's people who specialize in that type of thing, and you want to have those people in at the beginning and working on it. It just makes the process so much smoother, because these houses, the passive houses, or I also call them high performance houses if it's not going to go to full passive house certification. Just a high performance, super insulated house. They're different than normal houses. There's a lot of details that have to be nailed, and there's not as much wiggle room for error. They can be less forgiving during the construction phase. So you really want to have your team know their details and have experience with that. Because otherwise you might be paying someone to learn on your job, and that might not necessarily be the best way to go. So I always say right from the beginning, you want to start thinking about those things.
As far as who usually consults, I imagine that on the Passive House website, you could find Passive House consultants through that network. Are there any in the Valley that you've worked with?
There isn't that I know of. Most of the time when we do passive house, we have a passive house consultant who is the architect as well. So it kind of streamlines the process. And that's really helpful through the certification, but you can have an independent passive house consultant as well. But I kind of find that the architects who really specialize in high performance construction, they're going to know the details as well. And then as a consultant, either as the architect who's also the consultant or a separate one, they can guide you through the certification process and the modeling. So.
Cool. Awesome. Then Britton has a couple questions for you. One is actually a request to tell us about your next project, and the other is a question about if you work on renovations, and if not, why?
Our next project is a gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous home in Stowe, in the Stowe Hollow neighborhood. And it's with an architect from Stowe as well, who kind of specializes in zero energy houses. And it's a very high design house, so we're very excited about it. And it's for a young family who's moving to the area, which always gets me really excited to, have some more kids in the area. And, just to watch how excited they are to be realizing their dreams of moving to Vermont and building this gorgeous house is just really, really fun. We do a lot on Instagram, and so, we post pictures on that. I'm not sure I've ever updated our website, but it's pretty easy for us to do construction photos and process photos on that. So as that starts taking shape in the next couple months, I'm sure we'll be posting pictures of it. And then we've got a couple other houses in the works, but we really focus on one project at a time. I find that our quality stays high, and the quality of life also stays high doing one project at a time. So we've got a little bit of a waiting list at this point. And why we don't do renovations, was that the question?
He asked if you work on renovations, and if not, why?
Okay. We have in the past, and really, the business has just kind of evolved where it's almost all new construction right now. I'm definitely open to them, and that's kind of how I started many years ago. But for the energy piece, it is a little bit, it's a lot easier. I won't sugarcoat it. It's a lot easier to get, a zero energy house starting from the ground up versus working with existing bones. It's hard to insulate under a foundation or under a house that's already constructed. So we've kind of gravitated towards new construction, but we're not opposed to taking on the right project for renovation. So.
You might be getting a call from Britain. We have a couple other questions here. Christine is asking, although there are many possible factors, other than taking time to get the best possible site, what area can be the biggest unexpected stumbling block? Septic or ...
Should I stop? What happens if I stop sharing the screen?
Oh, then we'll just go back to our videos. You can do that.
Do you have a preference?
No, I don't mind either way.
Okay. So what happens? What's the biggest stumbling block? Is that was the question?
Yeah. What could be the biggest unexpected stumbling block? And they
Unexpected.
specifically mentioned septic as a potential issue.
Septic is not usually a big deal. It's a expensive deal, but it's not a big deal because normally, well, they're always spec'd by the state. That's actually the most highly regulated thing that we do in Vermont. There's some towns where we can we can get a zoning permit to build a house with a napkin sketch, but the only actual permit you need in the state of Vermont is a wastewater permit. I would say excavation is always the hardest thing because you really never know what you're going to get until you get your shovels in the ground. We always try and get a small machine in to poke around and do some test holes. And that really helps the structural engineer and the architects kind of design the foundation to fit the site versus making the site fit the foundation. And usually site work is quite a big budget number as well. Back to the allure of cheap land and just, you never know what you're going to get. But yeah, that's a big stumbling block and not unexpected, but another big stumbling block is just cost. It's just expensive, and it's sometimes, yeah, that's always the biggest stumbling block is like, holy cow, it's just pricey to build. So.
Cool. We have one more question. If anybody has lingering questions, please ask them now. John Duggan asked, before purchasing a piece of land, do you recommend that the owner meet with the contractor or architect first, or perhaps both?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes, and.
Yeah, I mean, it can't hurt. I think the more information you can have, the better. And also I think having an engineer take a look at the land can be really valuable as well. There's a couple engineers in the area that I work pretty closely with on projects, and they can be invaluable for, the time and money spent to get you started in the right direction. So I normally give out a couple numbers and say, hey, call this person and, have them walk the land with you and talk about it. And, if you're looking towards doing a passive house or a net zero house, you really want to make sure you have good solar exposure so that you can gain as much heat as possible from the sun. So you really want to be exposed on the southern slope if possible, to really be able to get that free heat into the house and hold it in. So.
Awesome. Well, I don't see any other questions yet, but they might trickle in a little bit. But thank you, Colin. This was awesome. I've received a lot of comments both on Facebook and on here that people really enjoyed your talk, even though you can't see any of them. So that's awesome. Next week, we have Ira Shaddis and Corey Miller from Friends of the Mad River. They're going to be talking about ways to build resilient communities 1 yard at a time, which I believe will focus on their Storm Smart program. So join us for that. And then the week after that will be, I believe, our final one for the spring, which turned into summer due to COVID, speaker series, and we'll be back in the fall. We got another thank you from Galen. So yeah, I think that we're we're complete with our house build.
Awesome.
9 to 14 months later. Also, just a quick reminder too, we do have our new 40th anniversary Yes Tomorrow t-shirts on our website, and I put a link in the chat for everybody. And Anne just asked if we'll have a link where you can listen in. We do have this video on our Facebook page as well. If you don't have a Facebook, you can email me at rachel@yestomorrow.org, and I can send you a link to that as well. I'll type this out to you right now.
And while Rachel is typing, if anyone's still listening, feel free to reach out to me with any questions or thoughts or anything like that. I love talking about this stuff and chatting about zero energy housing and stuff like that. So feel free to give me a call or send me an email, and we can continue conversation that way. So, and thanks to Rachel and Yes Tomorrow for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you, Colin. We couldn't have done it without you. At least this one.
I hope no one went gray during the presentation.
I might have a few, but it's fine. All right. Well, thank you again, everybody who tuned in. And thank you, Colin. We'll see you around town.
Awesome. Sounds good.
Bye.
Good night.